groups. I circulated to a couple, and there were some really important points that were being discussed. Can a group volunteer?
I'll talk for our group.
Great.
I think initially our group was very light on the advice giving. But ultimately recommendation for like for pregnancy care, like having a doula or support person that the mother trusted. We did some light research on that during our 5-minute breakout session, but really further than that we did not get.
Okay. Yeah, somebody else in the group that I was in said, do we have statistics on various clinical facilities and how well they do this? And we don't. And my experience in the of somebody in the National Health System in England was that when they were going to have surgery, the government provided the surgical outcomes data for that particular surgeon. And it would be really nice if we could have that kind of data available here, but we don't. Okay, well, let's go on. I'm not going to explain this graph other than it shows that no matter how rich or poor you are, black or white in the United States, your outcomes are worse. Your mortality outcomes, in this case for people, adults 20 to 64, are worse than people in those 6 European countries. And so this is the kind of argument to make that there's nobody who can escape at any level of wealth uh, being subject to dying younger in the United States, certainly compared to all the other rich countries.
Dr. Bizruka, your screen isn't being shared.
Oh, sorry. Uh, Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay. Share sound. Here we go. Can you see that?
We're seeing the Zoom call information, not the presentation.
Oh, you're not seeing a funny graph on the right? Should be. Let's see. What are you seeing? Can somebody tell me?
It just says UW-IM residence, December 28th, 2023. It's like a calendar invite.
Oh, new share. Let's try that. All right.
Okay, now we see it.
Okay. Let me not dwell on this graph then, other than the data are pretty clear that the richest among us don't do as well as much less rich people in those 6 countries there. Let's, in the interests of time, well, okay, this Zoom poll, let's not do the Zoom poll since it's not.
I actually launched one for yes, no. True can
Okay.
be yes and false can be
Okay,
no.
so if you know 2 Americans who died under age 65, if they lived in Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, or Portugal, only one would have died. Yes or no? If they'd lived in those countries, only one would have died. Okay, everybody's, all right, let's end the poll there. Everybody said true or yes. And so oops. Are you seeing this published earlier this year from showing that half of all the deaths under 65 would have been avoided if we had the mortality rates of its peers. And if you do a calculation of people dying younger between 1980 and 2019, there were 11 million excess deaths in this country that wouldn't have happened if we had the mortality rates of the other countries listed here. You can see those, right? So if you take those 11 million deaths over 39 years, that's 773 deaths a day. So think of it as 2 jumbo jets crashing every day as the carnage that is sort of under our radar. We're just not aware of it. It's not pointed out. Certainly, it should be a matter of comparison. So where is our health? Can you see the U.S. county life expectancy map? Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay. So this is 2014, and the deep blue are the longest life expectancy, and the yellow and the red are the lowest. And I want you to just look at this and see the Mississippi Valley, the Southeast, has a lot of low life expectancy. In Colorado, in the mountain regions there, that's where the blue is concentrated. And not too far away to the northeast of the blue is Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, the red, with the lowest life expectancy in the country. And I want you to now, we're going to look from 2014 to 2019. And what you see is a much greater concentration of yellows and a much smaller concentration of blues. That shows how before COVID, life expectancy had been declining in most U.S. counties since 2014. And this is the 2020 life expectancy map with a slightly different color scheme, but Summit County in Colorado, highest life expectancy, and Pine Ridge in South Dakota, the lowest life expectancy. And we'll face that in a case a little bit later. And there's a variety of ways of breaking the country down into states and making comparisons. So there's Washington State, the second longest life expectancy among U.S. states, Hawaii being the longest. And then down at the bottom, Mississippi. Mississippi has a life expectancy not as good as Bangladesh, and so on. So lots of ways of slicing and dicing and making comparisons. And of course, the higher green circles are the longer lived countries. So we're comparing US states with countries. Well, we're here in Washington State, where we have British Columbia north of us, and this is a map of life expectancy in 2002, where the darker brown are longer life expectancies and the lighter shades. And you can see that the 49th parallel, the border between Washington and British Columbia, is a real health divide. Just across the border, they live longer lives than we do. And this is graphing British Columbia in the light blue with Idaho and Washington, looking at trends from 1980 to 2000. So I have thrown an awful lot of statistics at you, an awful lot of graphs, and it's time for you to take a well-deserved break. So let's take a 10-minute bathroom break, or do you want 5 minutes? What do you think, Arita?
How, do you think I think 10 minutes would be better if we have time for it.
Okay, let's do 10 minutes. Let's see, do we need some more time or let's see. Uh, I have two Zooms here. Okay. Can people hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So is everybody back? Those are our, so I'm gonna I was going to present a few more killer facts, but in the interests of time, I'm going to skip over a few and try to make some sense out of all this stuff. So are we back? Are you recording now again?
Yeah, we're recording. I think you can go ahead and get started and people can trickle
Okay.
in if they're not back yet.
So I want to ask the question, what's going on? How can we explain all the killer facts that I presented? So Hawaii is the state with the longest life expectancy and has a variety of other uh, parameters that are in the better direction. The Department of Health in Hawaii, so this is the State Department of Health, produced a chronic disease disparities report in 2011 titled Social Determinants. And the graph you see, the graphic, the picture on the left is on page 2 of the report. And so I want us to, and it basically explains from a Hawaii Department of Health perspective, pretty well everything you need to know about root causes of health production. So with your indulgence, I want to explore this. So here's the graph. You know, Hawaii is a very mountainous state. They have oceans and waterfalls and rivers and passes. So here's the ocean down below, Makai, or to the water. And what's Makai? What's down below, the downstream effects? Well, all the chronic diseases that you learn to treat, and as you get older, you may have some yourself: cancer, heart disease, diabetes, COPD, and so on. So those are the effects of the health production concept. So what's on the shore just above the chronic diseases? Well, the traditional risk factors: smoking, physical inactivity, obesity. So notice Hawaii, the Department of Health, situates the behaviors that we're thinking about as pretty far downstream. So it's on one side of the river flowing into the ocean. What's on the other side? Healthcare, access to healthcare. Notice Hawaii puts that far downstream. So what's above that? Well, where the waterfall is are the what we typically call social determinants of health: racism, geography, pollution, poverty, income, wealth, occupation, employment, and so on, crime, safety, housing. Very important. Water's raging down there, but it's not at the source. It's not at the Mauka or to the sky upstream or root causes. What's there? Well, social and economic conditions. And what's above that? Political context and governance. So Hawaii situates whatever political context and governance means as the root cause of health production. So what does this mean to you? What does political context and governance mean to you? Anybody want to unmute and give me a sense of what they think that means?
Hi, this is Joey. Are you asking more in the context of healthcare outcomes? Because certainly I think political context and governance, might suggest, general attitudes toward healthcare and how we prioritize it or deprioritize it based on ways of maintaining control, trying to maintain health, and other things like that within the population.
But remember, healthcare, Hawaii already situated that. Let's just go back. healthcare is sort of on the shore above Mackay here.
Mhm.
So Hawaii, we should ask if anybody's from Hawaii and they know this, but healthcare is downstream, behaviors are downstream, where the waterfall is, everything else. And we're talking about the most important factor from the Department of Health in Hawaii being this phrase political context and governance. I think politics is just another way of saying that, except they've complexified it a little bit. Anybody else want to venture what political context and governance means?
I mean, I guess I was just gonna say which party like is in power in certain areas, and like what the specific platforms or policies of those parties are in terms of like supporting certain, being more taxation, all things like that, potentially.
Okay. And we'll get to that when we go to you looking at U.S. states. So yes, I think you're pretty close. Anybody else? Anybody from Hawaii? Anybody who's spent considerable time in Hawaii can venture an opinion as to whether Hawaii being the longest lived state in the country makes any sense to them, and perhaps reasons why. Okay, I guess nobody. So an internet survey was done asking people to rank factors that are most important to least important for health conditions. And I'm going to put this in the chat. Rank these items in terms of most important to least important. So can you see the chat? Just in your own mind, rank these from the most important for determining health to the least important. So just mentally rank those items, or on a piece of paper or whatever. So this was what I'm doing is recreating the study done at the Boston University School of Public Health, which was an internet survey among 8 countries, and they asked them to rank them from most important to least important. And I asked you to do this in one of the surveys earlier, so I'll present your results there as well as what the paper found as well. So anybody need more time? Please rank these from the most important to the least important in terms of producing health or determining health outcomes. Hang on, what does this say?
There's a question in the chat about what built environment means. Does
Okay.
it mean community or infrastructure?
So built environment might mean housing, the kind of housing, the proximity, whether there are parks nearby, whether there are playgrounds, things like that. That's usually what the term built environment means.
And then there are just a couple of comments saying politics is number 1.
Yeah. Social support in the least top 3. Okay. So let's see, are we seeing the screen now? I'm going to move on. This is what you ranked in the survey that Arita sent out a week or so ago. I think there were 11 or 12 of you that answered. Um, and you put income and wealth most important and politics least important. And healthcare, interesting, you put number 4. So here's what the United States survey results were. The internet survey or the most important was healthcare, next was education, third was genetics, social support was up there, but politics was last. So Americans feel that politics is perhaps the least important factor for producing health outcomes. And if we look at the other countries in the same survey, only China was the only country that didn't rank healthcare number 1. So we seem to be in a situation where we think healthcare is incredibly important for producing health, and notice pretty well every country will rank politics as the least important. And that sort of flies in the face of what Hawaii says. I mean, the Department of Health in Hawaii ranks politics or political context and governance as number 1, as the most important. And so we have a real disconnect, I think, in all around the world between what we've been told is really important, healthcare being really important, and politics not. So one thing we want to look at then is, what are the political determinants of health? And I like to think of images that make sense to me. And something that's really important is what is called the socioeconomic gradient in health. Namely, no matter what you look at, poorer people are going to do more poorly in health outcomes. And so if we think of the Titanic, everybody see the Titanic here, and survival by what class of ticket you had on the Titanic. If you had a first class ticket, 60% survived. Second class, 40%. Third class or crew, quarter survived. So the lesson here, always get a first class ticket on the Titanic. But what this does is illustrate the gradient, namely richer people, higher class status, whatever that translates into in the circumstances you're in, really is probably the most important factor in terms of producing health. And this is class status really is under political control. So we've now come into the phrases of many determinants of health. The social determinants, the items that were there in the by the waterfall in Hawaii. There are now many treatises looking at commercial determinants, at corporate determinants, and at political determinants. So I want to look at basically political determinants in terms of inequalities, economic inequalities. So this is the book on the lower left, The Spirit Level, Why Greater Equality Makes Societies Stronger, by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. And what they did was create an index of a variety of health-related factors that you see there on the left: life expectancy, math and literary scores, infant mortality, homicides, trust, obesity, mental illness, social mobility. And what these were indices, they were z-scores. If you know some biostatistics, z-scores are unitless measures. They multiplied them together to create a composite index of health and social problems. They then graphed that on the vertical axis from better to worse, and they graphed that with income inequality for 23 countries, the 23 rich countries. And their genius was not putting units on the graph, because the more complex the graph, the more people's eyes gloss over, and they don't get the sense of what's going on. So here we have 23 rich countries graphed with health and social problems and income inequality. And the red line is the regression line. There's a remarkably close relationship. The more income inequality, the worse the various health and social problems. And you can see United States, we don't do so well. And so one of the reasons could be that we have a lot of income inequality in this country. Well, Ichiro Kawachi is was chair of the Harvard School of Public Health Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And I brought him to UW some years ago to do the Walker Ames lecture. And this is a summary of his lecture on income inequality and how that impacts population health. And he gives 3 explanations for how income inequality damages our health. One is the relationship is concave, and I'll describe that briefly. Inequality has us making social comparisons, and then there's something he calls contextual or pollution effects. So the concavity effect is there's a diminishing return of health to greater income. So if you're already making $1 million, making an extra million's not going to improve your health very much. But if you're lower down on the curve, making $25,000, doubling your income is going to make a big difference in your health. So that's one of the ways in which the income-health relationship works, so that greater income inequality affects health, diminishing returns to health with greater incomes. The second that Ichiro talks about is that income inequality creates a gap between your income and those that you compare yourself to. We constantly make comparisons of how we're doing with others using social media or other ways. And the bigger the gap, the more stress and frustration. And one way that Ichiro illustrates this is a study done looking at air rage on passenger airplanes. And what's happened is that if you have a first-class cabin on a plane, then there's more air rage in the plane. And the examples of air rage are on the right hand there, a variety of belligerent behavior, smoking in the lavatories, intoxication. The study found that if you board through the first-class cabin, there's more air rage than if you board behind the first-class cabin, as in some jumbo jets. There's also more air rage in first class when you board through the first-class cabin. So this is an example of a structural situation creating class differences that leads to behavioral outcomes, which we can call air rage. And the air rage certainly increased during the COVID era as well. So more differences in class outcomes, more stress and frustration, and the more we take it out. Mass shootings are another example. So this was not in Ichiro's talk, but a study since then showed that, we're now used to mass shootings. There are many in the United States. They rarely make headlines. And a couple of studies have shown that the places with the highest number of mass shootings are where there's high levels of income inequality and high levels of income. Well, we can look at specific diseases and inequality. So here's a study of heart failure, congestive heart failure in 54 countries, looking at worse heart failure outcomes in countries with greater income inequality. And this is published in an American Heart Failure Journal from so we are finding that disease outcomes stratify by different kinds of inequality within those countries. So one way to treat heart failure perhaps might be to decrease inequality. Something else that was published in JAMA Internal Medicine, poverty seems to be associated with inequality, but poverty could be considered a cause of death. And these people in JAMA Internal Medicine earlier this year suggested that if poverty was considered a cause of death, it would be the fourth leading cause of death, poverty being defined as having less than 50% of median income. Well, what's poverty in a society? Well, poverty is a policy choice. Robert Reich, who was Clinton's Secretary of Labor, makes the very strong statement that poverty is a policy choice that a country chooses to have. And the United States has the most poverty of all rich countries, of course, as well as the most inequality. We saw that in the earlier graph. So we choose to have the poverty we do, and so we could choose to have less poverty by having different policies. I want to just tell you, this is one of, to me, the most significant graphical depictions of countries and their political context and governance. This is from Thomas Piketty, who wrote Capital in the 21st Century, the bestseller in 2014. This is from a later book, but it's the same graph. This looks at the share of tax revenue that goes to the government among the 5 countries you see there from 1870 to 2015. So think about it. Back in the 1800s, all 5 countries took about 7 to 10% of the country's revenue as tax to the government. And what did they do with that money? Well, they built a palace for the king. They maintained a standing army to protect private property. That's all you needed. Then governments in the early 1900s started collecting more tax. And so you can see 1910 up to about 1970 or 80, all 4 countries collected more tax, and eventually it plateaued. So around 1970, the United States, the blue line, about 30% of the country's income went to the government in taxation. It went up to 55% in Sweden, and in the other European countries, again, a higher proportion of the tax of the income of the country went to the government. So our government plateaued around 30%, and what does our government spend most of its tax revenue on? Well, the biggest expenditures for the military, $1 trillion goes to the military. Social Security for older people. Um, what does Sweden and France and Germany, what do they do with their tax money? Well, they spend it on universal health care and on a variety of social programs that benefit the people. So people in those countries pay higher taxes, but they get a lot more benefits. So the situation in this country has become even more extreme. Robert Reich again talks about a massive shift in wealth. Since 1980, and this is borne out by studies, $50 trillion has been transferred from the bottom 90% to the top 1% of the population. Think about it, $50 trillion. And we have a hard time thinking of such large amounts. But if you took our largest currency, $100 bills, took freshly minted $100 bills and stacked them one on top of another to reach $50 trillion, that would take us almost to the moon, 170,000 miles out into space. So that's how much we have given from the bottom 90% of us to the top 1% since 1980. So it's a huge wealth pump. And how do we do this? Well, we do this by not making the rich pay tax. So this is a graph of combined federal, state, and local tax paid by the different strata of Americans from 1950 to 2018. So in 2018, the richest 400 families paid the lowest rate of tax, 23%, whereas in 1950, on the right hand at the top, they paid 70% of their income in tax. So what we've done over the last many decades is create a situation in which we make the rich, well, the rich love this. They don't want to be taxed. We pay the tax bills and the rich get all of this massive wealth. So remember this graph. The richest 400 families in the United States pay the lowest rate of combined federal, state, and local tax. And that's a big problem. So this country is weird in that these 6 countries were shown a sample were given readings about inequality and its effects. And then they were asked, after reading this, should we increase taxation on the rich or not? And all the other countries, France, Germany, Switzerland, the UK, said yes. But in the United States, after reading this, they said, no, we shouldn't increase taxation on the rich. And I think part of this is explained by the American dream, which is truly a nightmare in this country. People believe that by the time they die, they're going to strike it rich, and so we shouldn't be taxed then. So this is really an issue of power. That is, inequality and the wealth of the rich is something in which they have power. Tony Benn, a British parliamentarian, asked these questions about power in society. What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how do we get rid of you? If we can't get rid of you, then we do not live in a democratic system. So we have this huge wealth pump. The rich and powerful are the ones who manage to get this structured, and we don't seem to be able to get rid of them since there isn't much support for decreasing inequality in this country. So how about healthcare's contribution to population health. Remember, people think it's the most important. We spend 1/6 of our total economy on healthcare, $4.2 trillion. It's a guaranteed income for you, and none of you will have to face poverty. And yet, what does healthcare do in terms of avoiding premature death? Well, here's a a comparison paper looking at 4 different estimation methods from Stanford on how much does medical care contribute to avoiding premature death. And the recommendation is somewhere, or the figure is somewhere around 10%. So about 10% of avoidable deaths can be linked to healthcare access in this country. Well, it's not that different in other parts of the world. Here's the book here on global health. The third author there is Hans Rosling. The Hans Rosling building, population health building on the UW campus is named after him. And in chapter 2, they list the determinants of health in order, socioeconomic and so on. And they put healthcare services number 7. And they make a particular call out. The other 6 determinants are more fundamental to human health than healthcare services. Another way of looking at this comes from Elizabeth Bradley's study at Yale. She looked at social expenditures versus healthcare expenditures and divided social expenditures by healthcare expenditures and graphed them for the rich countries. And United States, we front load on our expenditures on healthcare. The healthier countries front loaded on social expenditures, and social expenditures, if we're going to believe the data, are much more important in terms of producing health. Well, is it time for a brief bathroom break before we go into the home stretch, or shall we continue? Arita, what do you say?
How much more content do you think we have? We have about 35 minutes left.
I say we go on if people can hold their bladders.
Okay, yeah, let's
Okay.
or do you want to take like a 4-minute break and come back at like 11?
Okay, 4 minutes. I'm
Okay.
starting the.
That's good.
This is a shepherd tending his flock with his solar panel. So I want to talk now next about medical harm, and then I'll finish up with ACEs.
Sounds good. I just noticed we have John Cho. I think he's battling a cold, so I don't want to make him talk, but he's one of our APDs who just joined.
Okay.
Good morning. Good
Morning.
morning. I apologize for not being on the whole call, but I start going into paroxysms of coughing every time I talk too long. Non-COVID.
Okay. We're not going to ask you to speak. So just to summarize where we are, I asked, we looked at mortality outcomes among countries to show that for life expectancy, United States had a lower life expectancy than some 43 UN countries in 2021. And that if we eradicated our 3 leading disease killers in 2021, heart disease, cancer, and COVID, we still wouldn't be the longest lived country.
Yeah, you have, I'm sure, no recollection of it, but I was in one of your courses in 2001 or 2002 when I got my master's. It was in, I think it was a qualitative methods course. So.
Oh, okay. Yes, I used to teach that then. So I also, well, I starting winter quarter, I teach a course in which the health of populations, in which the unit of analysis is the country. The patient is the country.
Mhm.
And so we have um, shorter lives than people in 40, 50 other countries. And that doesn't seem to get much political attention. So I then went on in trying to explain why our longest lived state is Hawaii. And in Hawaii, the Department of Health lists political context and governance as the most important factor in producing health. So we then explored politics as a factor that leads to greater income inequality, and so income inequality leads to all sorts of worse mortality and social outcomes.
Very
And
good.
that's sort of where we are at this point. Social factors really matter, and somehow Americans seem okay with having such a large amount of inequality. Shall we go on, Arita?
Yep, let's get started again. That sounds good.
Okay. So I want to, let's see, are we here? Okay. I want to talk about medical harm. And if we had time, I'd ask what experiences you've had with medical harm. And let me just describe my own experiences. When I was a 15-year-old, I had a patch of acne right here. I presume you can see me. And my mother took me to a dermatologist. It was right here in the angle of my mandible. And the dermatologist, this is the 1950s, he said, that's no problem, we'll just radiate it. So he laid me down on a gurney. He focused a beam on the corner of my jaw, closed a big heavy lead door, went out. I heard about a 10-second buzz. The door opened. He said, okay, I'll see you in a week. And I came back for weekly radiation treatments, and my patch of acne melted away, and I was just such a happy camper. You know what it's like when you're a teenager with acne. So that was that. And 17 years later, a lump appeared there. And that turned out to be a lymphoma. So, we don't radiate for acne anymore because we know it does more harm than good. So I've had that lymphoma since 1975, and I've had, so that's my personal experience with medical harm. I've also harmed patients, and I remember in a lecture for medical students on medical harm, one of the people there said, in your lifetime, you'll kill on average about 4 patients. And so that's at least what the situation presents. So what's in the popular press? I told you my story. I'm always interested in what gets out, and this is U.S. News and World Report 2015 Best Hospitals. And on page 74, there's a call out. Last fall, one analysis put the number of preventable deaths alone at 444,000. And I mentioned earlier the paper in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, by these two Hopkins faculty, saying that medical care in the United States is the third leading cause of death. And most of us would find that, would shudder to think that's true. Whenever it's studied, it's always a leading cause of death. Here's a study from Australia, or an article in the New Scientist pointing out the same thing in Australia. So we're not alone. So I just wanted to review, how do we get studies on medical harm? So the first study was the Harvard malpractice study that was in the New England Journal in 1991. And the researchers at Harvard wanted to get a state to let them have access to a sample of hospital charts for a particular year that they would analyze for harm. And eventually they got New York State to give them 3,000 hospital charts, and they were reviewed by a committee, and they found adverse events, bad things happening in 3.7% of admissions. A quarter of those were negligent. The adverse events were drug reactions, wound infections, complications, and deaths occurred in 1/7 of the adverse events. And then half of the deaths were as a result of negligence. And this was published in 3 papers in the New England Journal back then. And this is sort of a summary of those. So I became interested. Remember, I talked about the Health Olympics. Since that first paper in 1991, there have been many other studies using similar methods in many different countries. So I began to tabulate them with Medical Harm Olympics. And so these were studies in different countries. Only one was a prospective study. And in the right column is the percentage of deaths per admission to hospital. So you have about a 1% admission in the UK in the study in 2004, 1% chance of dying from getting admitted to a hospital. In Canada, it was 1.6. In Spain, it was 4.4%. Well, I've stopped doing that there because others have done the same thing. These are the study from the Netherlands tabulating similar data on adverse events in hospitals. Only we've sanitized the term now and we call it patient safety, because medical harm sounds too, or adverse event doesn't sound too comforting. So what's an example of a medical harm? This is a picture that I took from an article in the New York Times in 2000. I want you to look at what it depicts. It's a radiograph of Donald Church. And what hospital was he in? The University of Washington Medical Center. Notice all the identifier data. Donald Church had surgery, abdominal surgery, and he complained afterwards for about 6 months of having belly pain. And everybody told him, no, everything's fine. You're not having your pains in your head. And guess what? He tried to go through a metal detector. And so this 13-inch malleable retractor was left inside Donald Church's abdomen. And this is when the hospital rated among the top 10 hospitals in the country. It's the hospital that you've certainly worked at. And so here's a not uncommon situation, that is, we leave all sorts of stuff behind at surgery. There's also a term called medical reversal. And for example, we no longer radiate for acne because we know it harms more than it helps. In the 1970s, we didn't give aspirin to people with chest pain because we had no reason to do so. But then we discovered it made a big difference. So that's another kind of medical reversal. Things we didn't used to do, and now we do because we know that there are medical benefits to doing so. Question now is, what are we doing now that in the future we will find maybe harming? Or what are we not doing now that in the future we'll find harm? I remember a lecture in medical school in 1972 by a professor of medicine. And he said to us, in 10 years' time, you're going to find out that half of what I'm telling you is wrong. I just don't know which half. And this is a cover of the New York Times Magazine depicting that. So I think of the work I've done over many years in medical care as an art form. We're constantly learning, and we need to learn, relearn, unlearn what we used to know. And so I think this is clear. I want to touch on early life, and I want to end on time. And I would ask you to, I would talk about some of my early life issues and ask you about yours. But there's the life cycle approach to health. You know, we start in diapers, we go to Disneyland, we're on the upswing on the roller coaster, rock and roll, masturbation, sex, marriage, career. You're on the upswing. I've had my colonoscopy. I'm reaching retirement. I'm drooling. I'm confused, and I'll be back in diapers soon. In terms of your health in the life cycle approach, before you go to Disneyland is when roughly half of your health as an adult has been programmed. The studies show that as we go from the erection to the resurrection, the first 1,000 days after conception is when roughly half of your health as an adult is programmed. So healthier countries privilege those first 1,000 days. So think about the fetus. The fetus lives, this is the womb with a view hypothesis. The fetus lives in a sheltered environment. It receives signals about the outside world through mother's stress hormones and other factors that cross the umbilical cord through the placenta, and the fetus is trying to figure out, is it a nice nurturing world and I can take time to develop my organs? Or is it a hostile world and I'm going to have to compromise my development to do what I'm here to do? Our purpose as a species is to survive, to reproduce, so the species doesn't die out. So fetal development can be compromised so that they may deliver prematurely, they may deliver with a low birth weight, which will enable them to survive, to reproduce, namely to have a baby, and then pay the price with chronic diseases later in life. So that's the idea. You start with conception. A student of mine did this graphic when she presented it at her Ignite talk in Town Hall in Seattle. So she talked about the importance of the first 1,000 days from conception to the 9 months in utero. And by the time you're blowing out 2 candles on your second birthday, 1,000 days have elapsed, and half of your health as an adult is programmed through epigenetic mechanisms. Some science to back this up. Well, the Dutch hunger winter is an example of a natural experiment in which there were nutritional stress during a period when the Nazis commandeered food rations in Holland, and people only got 1,000 calories instead of about 2,000. So there were about several thousand pregnant women then. And so they were able to look at their exposure to the famine, to the restricted caloric intake in the 3 trimesters, and look at their outcomes as adults. And if you're exposed in early gestation, then the factors in the right-hand column, mental disorders, glucose intolerance, obesity, coronary heart disease, breast cancer, they would be there to in adulthood. In the middle column, if you were exposed in the mid-trimester, you'd have kidney and lung disease, because that's when those organs are forming, plus glucose intolerance. And also, if you're exposed in late gestation, glucose intolerance. And by that, we're talking about glucose resistance. So there's a lot of now scientific evidence that various stressors in early life, be it nutritional stress, psychosocial stress, and others, lead to adult chronic diseases. I hope everybody has heard the term adverse childhood experiences. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So back in the 1970s, in Kaiser Permanente down in San Diego, Vincent Felitti did supervised fasting to get people to to lose weight. And what he found was that a large proportion of the biggest losers, especially women, put on their weight very quickly. And he tried to understand it. Sorry, I'll go back. And what he discovered was that many of the women who put on weight rapidly after successful weight reduction had been sexually abused as children. And with the weight reduction, they became attractive to men, and they didn't want that experience. And so they put the weight back on as their body armor. And so Felitti said, well, this is really weird. Let's do a study of early childhood experiences in a Kaiser cohort over the next 20, 30 years. So this was finally published in 1998 in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, and he classified ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, as forms of abuse, household dysfunction, and neglect. And the abuse could be emotional, physical, and contact sexual abuse. Household dysfunction could be the mother treated violently, somebody an alcoholic or a drug user, somebody in prison, somebody chronically depressed or suicidal, or not being raised by both biological parents, and then forms of emotional and physical neglect. And the percentages here were the percentages of those forms of adverse childhood experiences in the original Kaiser San Diego studies. What he found was the more ACEs, there would be an ACE score, the presence of one of these 10. And the higher your ACE score, the more likely you were to have to inject drugs, to attempt suicide, to take a lot of antipsychotics, and not be alive as you get older. So an ACE score of 7 was a 20-year gap in life expectancy. Even an ACE score of 4, the upper left, meant your chances of being over age 65 was much, much less. So real problems with ACEs. And so healthier societies try to create conditions that don't have as many adverse childhood experiences. See, the original ACE study was the tree that you see there. It was what was happening in the household. We can now consider the realm of ACEs to be the roots under the tree, what's happening in the community. And then we can see the tornado as the ACEs in the environment or the country. So healthier societies privilege early life. We try to have fewer ACEs. One of the ways in which you can privilege early life is to grant a working woman who's pregnant paid time off after she has her baby. Worldwide, there are only 2 countries in the world with populations of 1 million or more that don't have a national policy giving a working woman who's pregnant paid time off after she has her baby. One is the United States, and the other is Papua New Guinea, half of a big island north of Australia. So that's another way in which we stand out. We don't support early life. Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave and abolitionist over 150 years ago, said, "It's easier to build strong children than repair broken men." But we have a huge industry set up to repair broken men and women. So we don't have much time, but I want us to try and look at this at a case that represents most of what we've talked about. So you're back in your clinic. You see a 57-year-old recently divorced man whose residence is in Summit County, Colorado, highest life expectancy. He's made considerable money in startups, has additional houses in Maui as well as Seattle. You see him in Seattle. His chief complaint is he wants to live as long and healthy as possible. He recently read a book about health that pointed out that we have much worse health than in many other countries. And he found much advice on the web about how to be healthier. So which of the following would be most beneficial in your advising him? But and taking a detailed social history, you found he was born of low birth weight and abused as a child. He coped by becoming successful in business. He doesn't smoke, uses few recreational drugs, he's not overweight. The screening lab panel shows only an elevated CRP. So what would your advice be? Should he move to Hawaii, the country's healthiest state? Should he move to another country with a longer life expectancy? Should he change his diet to avoid processed foods and sugar, or get regular screening CTs for pathology? So why don't we go into the breakout groups and what would your thoughts be on your advice to this man? Okay.
I think everybody should be assigned now. John, feel free to just stay here. And we've been like popping around into rooms and things, but don't want to make you talk. So I might just like go pop into one of the rooms. Everybody else who's still in here should have a room that they're assigned to. So if you hear me, you can just pop into your assigned room.
Rita, could I get assigned to breakout room 6? I think my internet cut out, and then
Are
the
you
one I used to be in was in 6.
Oh, okay, let me put you back in room 6.
Thank
Where are you now?
I'm in 7.
Okay, move to, okay, I moved you to 6.
Thank you.
Osaid and Beth, if you're there, have you assigned to rooms, but they may be different than rooms you were assigned to before. Not sure if they're here. Okay.
If you want to go ahead and pop in, I'll hold the fort here.
Okay, sounds good. Room with 3 people.
I also feel like things like moving to like say Japan or something like that with like a higher life expectancy is I mean, I don't know how easily you can sort of translate those benefits if you're not sort of like familiar with the culture and you know, like the way of life there and everything like that. And
I feel like social supports are so huge.
exactly, yeah,
Like,
that too.
Good discussion. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Katie. Were you gonna say something? Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, yeah, like I don't think we can translate the fact that people born there have this long life expectancy. That would mean that someone like moving there like late-ish in life would like magically have a longer life expectancy, since we just learned that most of it is what happens between the ages of 0 and like 2, and that's already baked in. So probably a void process, like probably for an individual, like on a population level, it seems like habits maybe aren't as like significant as we thought, but on an individual level, I probably would go with a void process. Sure.
Yeah, I don't know how to approach like the fact that, you know, we know ACEs affect health, but somebody can't go back in time. Like they have no control over what happened to them as a kid. So I know it's important, but I don't really know how to apply it to their treatment.
And it kind of feels like this person has, to some extent, I don't know, is it recording this breakout room? It still says recording. Anyways, yeah, just, I don't know, to some extent, like, you know, this person seems to have kind of beat the odds, so to speak, already, in that like they don't have substance use, they're not on antipsychotics, they like aren't, you know, they're alive. So it's always like, it's not like a deterministic thing, you know, you have those experiences, it increases your likelihood of having those bad outcomes, but to some extent, not everybody is going to, and some people would like, no, ACEs have bad outcomes. So I think like you have to distinguish the population from the individual. Okay, I'll let you guys discuss. I'm gonna go back to the meeting. I was trying not to talk and to let there be discussion. I realized I was talking too much, so I came back.
I couldn't help but notice that Osaid was very slow in joining his room, and he left his breakout room after all. Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Do what we can.
How has the session been?
Good, really good. I think, oh yeah, we only have 3 minutes left. We've covered like a lot of content.
I was gonna say, to get to ACEs at the very last minute.
Shall we bring people back?
I did. They should be popping in
Great.
any
Thank
second.
you.
Yeah.
That was 5 seconds. And about 2 minutes left. They're there.
Here they come. Like magic. I see Devin brushing his
Is the hard
teeth.
stop at 7:30, at 11:30?
I mean, if we go a few minutes over, like people who need to leave are welcome to hop off and like go to clinic and such. So we can like go a little bit more, but like if anyone needs to hop off, please feel free to do so.
Okay, I'm just gonna. Oh, sorry, we should get back here and can we hear from one breakout group on your advice for this man? One group want to volunteer?
Our group was just saying that we feel have some challenges kind of translating the big picture population health stuff to an individual, and feel like we would end up kind of resorting to the like eat good whole foods and exercise, and feel a little bit dissatisfied with that.
Okay, good. Where are we? Let's see. So what are we gonna, so just a quick point. We talked about state policies. So US state policies that are liberal on the political spectrum have seen more rapid and sustained gains in life expectancy than the conservative states. And you can see the states across the bottom, the ones in green and the ones versus the ones in brown. So having more liberal policies, and these are the spectrum there, I think can lead to better health improvements.
We're not seeing your screen.
Oh, sorry. That's right. I got to go back and share. Sorry about that. Sorry. So just to recognize that states with conservative state policies in this slide have seen less life expectancy gains from 58 to 2018. So states enacting more liberal policies are by and large going to do better. And these are the spectrum of state policies that impact health. So as a country, what are we going to do? Well, I think we should let Papua New Guinea be the only country without a national paid parental leave policy. We should support more childcare. We should have universal health care. We should tax wealth. Don't let the rich pay the lowest tax rate. And in terms of the black-white differences, programs of reparation, I think, would be very desirable. So I want to just briefly mention social prescribing, which is at least considered in Canada among training programs and practices. So this is.
But social prescribing acknowledges that people's lives, what influences their health, goes far beyond what happens in the clinic or the hospital. It involves feelings of connection to their community, social supports, ability to pay for nutritious food, caregiving responsibilities, and so much more. And all of these social factors actually form 80% of health.
The impact of a widely spread social prescribing system would allow room for more people to be seen, because it's important to remember that not all healthcare needs are best met at the doctor's office, that sometimes they are best met outside of the doctor's office with human connection.
Full service family practice or primary care is at a crisis point in Canada right now. And one of the issues is capacity. And I think what people don't realize is that social prescribing can greatly increase the capacity of primary care.
We see a lot of patients who have declined and now need help with activities of daily living. And if we were able to intervene earlier by providing them with social prescribing and getting them connected to resources in the community, like exercises that might be acceptable to them, food security to ensure they have a healthier diet, and social interactions through joining community programs, we know that all these things lead to a healthier lifestyle and improve the chances of healthy aging.
And we have social prescribing in the United States as well. So social factors are really important. Social connections really matter. Let me just go beyond this. So I used to blame my patients for all the bad things they did that made me have to take care of them on an emergency basis. I stopped doing that after I learned Japan smokes the most and is the longest lived. I think the social history is really critical to understanding the whole patient, and I would explore early life, I would explore adverse childhood experiences, understand where they were born, and so on. I have spent most of the last 30 years, well, I even talked about some of these ideas with patients in the ER and their families. I've struggled to work in the community, and I've gone to high schools and junior high schools and talked about these ideas. So you have a tremendous scope in what you can do outside of the clinic. And I think our health decline has been unique among rich nations, and it needs to be at least on the presidential debate agenda, which it is not. We tend to not distinguish health from healthcare. You ask somebody, do you want health or healthcare? They conflate the terms. We access health, pay for health, get health, insure health. We do nothing of the kind. It's healthcare. So every time you use the word health, ask yourself, do I really mean healthcare? And so getting the language right is an important step. Join an organization, become an advocate. I belong to the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I'm on the board. We have an economic and equity health task force that is quite important. I wear I don't have my hat on right now, but draw attention to your ideas to the extent that you can. The State of the Union is required by the Constitution. Suppose the State of the Union address made comparison to other unions, then maybe we would do something. And I leave you with the words of the Jeffrey Rose in his book, The Strategy of Preventive Medicine. This is a book using English terminology. The last paragraph in the book is, the primary determinants of disease are mainly economic and social, and therefore its remedies must also be economic and social. Medicine and politics cannot and should not be kept apart. So what have I said? Well, we're not doing so well. There are a variety of things we can do. And I've probably presented quite a few ideas that you weren't aware of. And I think all of you have been in a situation where you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that something was true, and you later found it to be untrue. Can anybody remember something like that? Something you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt to be true, and later discovered it wasn't. Anybody remember?
Are you
Well,
talking
you
about
got
like
over that.
healthcare related examples or just like general things?
Well, I'm just talking about
These.
about Santa Claus, right? You can see that screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's my email. I'm happy to engage in any discussions, happy to work with you to see if there are ways you can bring these ideas into your clinic. And I'm happy to stay on and talk with anybody who wants to, but thank you for the opportunity to present these ideas to you.
Thanks, Dr. Bezruchka. Any questions from anyone out there? I had a question, but I'll wait to see if anybody else has any questions. I know we're kind of over time, so please feel free to drop off. My question was, I think like you kind of painted a very convincing picture that the crux of all of this a lot of it comes down to income inequality. But then there was that really kind of damning slide that showed that in America, when you tell people about this, they're actually less likely to support more progressive taxation policies. And to me, that's always kind of been the heart of the matter, is like when I talk to people about this stuff, they're just not very receptive to believing it. Coming back to this, like, what did you believe? That was untrue. That's now true. It seems like a lot of people do have fixed ideas about things like healthcare is the #1 cause of good health. Income inequality is not the problem. Those sorts of things that seem to be like just really, really kind of like concrete roadblocks in the way to any sort of real reform towards making these things better. And to me, that kind of just becomes very frustrating. I'm just kind of give up on that whole, notion, like to John's point too, income tax in Washington. This is like a big one where people are just not in support of it. And so how do you deal with like what we need to get done with the fact that it seems almost impossible to get there from like a social, political, cultural perspective?
Yeah, I wish I had an easy answer to your question. Well, I think we have to get good at presenting the ideas or talking about the ideas that I've done today. And so, in the courses I teach, my students have to take the ideas in the course. And before COVID, they used to have to create a physical meeting in a space, invite people and present the ideas. But with COVID, they had to do it on social media. And so gaining social media skills to present these ideas, I think has tremendous potential. So, a student might be able to get 10 people out to a physical meeting, but they can reach thousands on social media, and they do, and I get them to report this in the courses. So I think we need to gain facility at talking about these ideas, write about them where you can work together. It's, we made striking changes when we were shown to be behind other countries in the 1960s. In 1957, the Russians launched the satellite, Sputnik, and we were totally caught off guard. And so because of the awareness of that event, we set a goal to land a human on the moon by the end of the next decade. Suppose there was a media campaign to make Americans aware that their lives were short and that the reason was the inequality that they seemed to support or treasure. Suppose we had a media campaign to that effect, like we did after the Russian Sputnik launch. Maybe we could set a goal to become Australia set a goal to become the healthiest country by 2020. Back in 2007 or 8, a new administration came in and they sort of stopped the goal setting. But countries have goals, and our goal right now is to make the rich even richer than they are, and that could be changed.
I'll leave one comment before we break off. I think trainees often feel disempowered and disenfranchised. And I think that it's important to know that you all have an outsized voice in terms of our community and society. And so don't be afraid to speak out and say things, letters to the editor, personal essays, those kind of things really make a difference and are oftentimes seen in a different light because of your role as physicians. So embrace that and take ownership of that.
Yes,
I think yeah, we're well over time, and I want to make sure that the rest of the team has time to get to their afternoon clinics. Thank you so much for this provocative and interesting talk.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you so much for speaking to us on this holiday week while you're on vacation. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I've looked forward to it and I've enjoyed it. You've made my day.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.